And we're back, and we've got a very, very special guest with us, Adir. You're playing on your phone?
Well, no.
I'm not looking at our guest.
I'm looking.
We've got official friend of the pod, our number one guest ever. So Joe Aston, obviously famous Joe Aston, came on our pod about 6 months ago maybe, 6 months ago now. It was our number one. It's been overtaken now because we've obviously had such exponential growth. But for a long time, it was our number one listened to pod.
It's the number one guest that people say to me, get Joe back onto the podcast. Sure. Absolutely true. Well, you know, from previous interactions with me, I don't do flattery. So you should assume everything I'm saying is absolutely true. Yeah. Definitely not on this pod. But yes, I do frequently get asked by people, when are you getting Joe back on? Or
we've got him back on. So
there you go.
Rest assured.
Here I am. And maybe I'll be back again. I mean, has anyone been back twice?
Well, John's yes. been a bunch of times. He pesters us constantly to come on the show.
God, I don't feel special now.
Mike has something to say on every episode. He keeps talking. Is he considered a guest?
So you've been, since we last spoke, remember at the time we spoke about the book and you were saying, if I can get to 10,000, I'll be happy. I think this must be the highest selling business book in Australian history, surely at 60,000+ copies.
Is that how many it's sold? That's incredible.
I don't know about history. I know it's very high for a business book. There's no doubt about it. Maybe there's a comparison.
I don't think there is.
But I don't know.
Well, it's many multiples of my less best-selling book, but
you also wrote a very nice book, but unfortunately didn't quite have the following that Joe had leading into the book launch.
Yeah, not exactly.
Well, I mean, in fairness, I don't know that it's about my following. I think I'm lucky to have fastened upon a subject that people are obsessed with.
Well, I think there was a bit of that. But I think
really broad appeal.
We see Qantas, and when I speak to journos, they get 2x the views on Qantas. I'm not sure what your views were like, but so maybe you would have got 30,000 if you wrote a book on a memoir. So I think it was, the alchemy of your...
There was a hagiography that was written about Qantas. How many did that sell? What was that called?
It was called Alan Joyce and Qantas.
Is that what it was called? Really?
Yes. And it
probably sold 2,000 copies.
It sold 5,000 or 6,000, but
that's not bad.
Yeah, it's. I remember one publisher when I told them that I was entertaining an offer from Simon & Schuster. The publisher that I went with in the end, and this other publisher said, airline books don't sell. You'd be crazy to write that book. Which sort of which I listened to at the time, and I, very nearly didn't write the book.
Little did they understand it wasn't an airline book, right? That's the truth of it.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think there's something in that. You only get one Alan Joyce, don't you? Really?
he was your Alan Bond.
I say it's funny. I feel a bit stupid already. Every time I say something, I go, actually, that's not true, because in many ways, there's lots of Alan Joyces. Hamish Douglas is Alan Joyce, and Jean-Sébastien Jacques at Rio Tinto is Alan Joyce.
Well, no one can say his name, stories, which makes it hard. It's tricky.
So it is a repetitive story of hubris and ultimately sort of madness. But Alan Joyce was the biggest, most famous company manager in Australia probably ever. They did that research around the time of the marriage equality mail out, and they said the research showed the three most famous business people in Australia, four most famous, were Gina Rinehart, Rupert Murdoch, James Packer, and Alan Joyce.
Yeah.
But the other three, of course, are not managers of companies; they're proprietors. So he stood alone. Yeah, head and shoulders above any other normal CEO in the country.
Yeah, I think that you could say there's only one Qantas. That's the real differentiator, because the nature of it is everybody knows that brand. Like Hamish Douglas, no one really knows his business unless you're in the industry. Yeah. I know you know
he's he's AFR famous.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. But like Qantas, everybody knows Qantas. Everybody has an opinion on it. Its tentacles touch every part of society, from the very top politicians all the way to the bottom, and
to the Jetstar punters.
Everything, right? Yeah. And then you get this guy that comes in that is kind of the perfect fodder for just stories, and I think that was the uniqueness about it, and the brand.
We went from kind of nothing to villain to hero to villain, which is pretty rare.
When was the first villain with the union thing?
The
grounding.
I thought he was a hero when he did that.
Most people did.
You're in the minority.
Was I?
Yeah. I think that I ultimately, my personal belief is that decision was ultimately justified.
Absolutely.
I think that lots of people decided that over time who didn't think that when they were stuck somewhere on Derby Day in 2011, right? But I think that was a very high stakes move, but ultimately it kept wages at Qantas at or below inflation for 10 years. And that transformed the economics of that company, and it was a very, very good decision. Now, from the TWU's perspective, that was very, very damaging, but it sort of broke them. And
who was the chairman of that at that time?
Lee Clifford.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a tough guy who was prepared to do tough things.
A tough guy, but everything was under control until Lee Clifford left.
Yeah.
Because he was tough on industrial relations, but he was also tough on Alan Joyce.
Right.
He knew when to pull the rein and say, son, calm down.
Yeah.
That is not a capacity that Richard Goyder had.
Yeah.
And that's where things started.
There's probably also an element that when you're the incumbent, so Joyce was the incumbent when Goyder started. So there's obviously a very different relationship there than he had with Lee.
Yes, absolutely. And he had become the rock star CEO, the celebrity who had survived amazing crises. And so the board deferred to him. And all of this has been found by the company's own governance review.
Has there ever been a celebrity CEO who hasn't ended up in failure? You think Eddie Groves, he was obviously a founder as well, but you think of all those, like in the crisis, there was a bunch of them that I wrote a book on that all collapsed. Has there ever been one that has actually stood the test of time in Australia?
Look, I can't think of one, but that doesn't mean there isn't.
Andrew Forrest is going well still. I mean, he's a celebrity CEO. Well, that's true. And people have got lots to say about him, but ultimately he's still printing cash. It's still going well for him.
Sure.
I mean, he's got, some of his comments are unusual.
Andrew Forrest, if he didn't have $15 billion in his pocket, you'd just cross the road to avoid him. I mean, he's just like mad.
Well, also not actually a CEO. He's a bad CEO.
Yeah, he's chairman.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Alan Joyce is reportedly writing a book. Is
about you, Joe. I hear I'm just writing a book about you.
How cool would that be? What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I mean, Alan Joyce should be free to do whatever he wants to do.
Should he write a book?
They say everyone has a book in them, which is where it should stay. Look, I wanted to engage with Alan Joyce. I made that clear from the outset to him directly.
And you knew him.
And indirectly.
Yeah.
Look, I understand why he wouldn't want to talk to me. I was very, very critical of him. But I think the thing about Alan Joyce is he's incredibly talented. He made big mistakes, and I think his judgment became impaired in his final years at Qantas. But one of the most talented executives in aviation globally, and one of the most talented executives Australia has produced in the last 15 years. And if he was more able, as he had been at the beginning of his career, if he was more able to listen to perspectives that he didn't like, he would be in a very different situation today. And you would be talking about someone who's probably be the chairman of a Big Four bank. Or of BHP. Yeah. And it's sort of sad to me that that's no longer available to someone of his capabilities because he's too proud to admit his mistakes.
Yeah.
So if Alan Joyce wants to write a book and say why it's all so unfair, then I think that would be inadvisable.
There'd be some great
but I would love to hear Alan Joyce's perspective and perhaps even see some admissions of fault. But look, I don't know if that's something he's capable of.
There'll be some. I reckon we'll get to round part in a second. I reckon you'll 10x your subscriber base if he ever writes this book. That's just you'll be the biggest beneficiary of this, not the publisher.
I suspect his book is not going to be called Mea Culpa.
How I did it.
The thing is though that hubris. There's a lot of people that achieve great things that have this hubris that seems to carry them forward because it's not easy, especially if you're doing something that is contrarian in nature. It's not easy to get this kind of self-motivation to keep going. And, the story of the week probably is Ange Postecoglou winning the trophy at Tottenham. And his hubris is, I always win a trophy in my second year at a club. It's a ridiculous hubris, right? Somehow he pulled it off. And so I think the difference is he has the hubris, but not the self-interest to kind of say, as a consequence of me doing this, now I will try and enrich myself and expand my power base as much as I possibly can. And I think that for me, it was less the hubris around Qantas. I mean, it wasn't great, but it was more that the delivery wasn't there to match the hubris, and then there was all of this self-aggrandizement and self-enrichment that went along with it. That, to me, was the issue with all of this. We should talk about... I was
supposed to speak about... We chatted on when we were in last time, the new regime at Qantas. So now Goyder's out, John Mullen, Adir's mates in, who's universally respected, and Vanessa, who you've had mixed views on. I've been a fan of her on record. I think she's done given the hospital handball she got, and obviously she's part of that as CFO, and a bunch of other roles. But I think she's done a great job. Are you still on the fence on her, or have you sort of changed your views a bit?
Yeah, I am on the fence because what's actually changed at Qantas? You look at their RASK, which is revenue per available seat kilometre. So that's just their revenue adjusted for the distance flown, is only 13% below the absolute peak of the inflation crisis in December 2022. So they are still price gouging the bejesus out of us, but they're doing it with a nice smiley face.
Do you think that's
and a nice warm lady instead of a mean little Irishman, right?
But why is that bad? Like, why do you think that's bad?
Well, I didn't say that it was bad.
Okay,
but I'm just paying.
But is that not good?
I'm saying what has changed.
But
what's interesting is it bad? It's certainly not bad for shareholders.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is if people suddenly think that Qantas has gone
a different. I see what you mean. Okay.
I don't know that it really has.
I think one thing that definitely has changed, in my view anyway, is when I broke my leg a few months ago, and I've been on 3 different airlines, and the service I got from Qantas was the best I've ever had from Qantas. It was better than any other airline, And I wouldn't historically associate this with Qantas, but the care that people gave was pretty exceptional. So I think that has changed.
Well, I would actually attribute that to Qantas. I think Qantas staff have always been the best thing about Qantas, and they make that airline.
I didn't find, if you go back 3-4 years ago, that's COVID.
Well,
I don't find
3 or 4 years ago, things were pretty grim, and they're very understaffed.
Pre-COVID, or even, I never found that level of service.
So I can finish my answer, the one thing I will give Vanessa Hudson credit for is that she has more empathy for her staff and for her customers, which is a pretty low bar because I think that was one area in which Alan Joyce really lacked.
Yeah.
But she does actually have some human empathy, and you'd be surprised that that goes a long way. But internationally they're exposed to really strong competition, and that's where their commercial performance is weakest. Not surprisingly, domestically they still have a really powerful entrenched monopoly. And so they failed to invest in their equipment. So instead of getting all of these new aircraft that Jetstar's getting or that International's getting, we fly around between Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide on these 23, 25-year-old aircraft that they're just going to whack some new seats and paint on. So that's those are the decisions of a effective monopoly operator.
It's not as if you can buy a bunch of planes now. There's a pretty big waiting list.
Well, they have options, and they have purchase options up the wazoo, so that's just not right.
But you can't get a plane delivered tomorrow. It's going to take 5 years for a plane to come.
It won't take 5 years. You don't buy a purchase option. Purchase options and rights come with delivery slots that you can activate.
I thought they gave up all those options.
No, well, they gave up some options on 787s. They bought 300 aircraft, firm and options in 2022, which they could increase the number of domestic aircraft they have coming.
The 2022 order is not going to get here till 2028, 29. I would have thought
lots of them aren't getting here till then. That's right. That's exactly right. But they're only for instance, for Qantas domestic, they're only getting 28 new planes. Yeah. Now there are 75 Qantas domestic 737s, almost all of which are now 20 or older. And there's only 28 aircraft coming to replace those. So I'm sorry, 28 does not go into 75.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Well, it's slightly larger, but still, even 40.
So we'll get 5 years down the track and be having this conversation and go, they've now got 30 ancient aircraft that they haven't got any replacements for. And Vanessa Hudson, in failing to buy them in adequate number, is doing exactly what Alan Joyce did, which is making it someone else's problem. That's her successors.
I think my bigger issue, since we're talking about Qantas, my comment is that is a bad issue. The fact that they're still able to charge $1,000 or $1,500 one way in a flight between Melbourne and Sydney on those planes, I mean, that is unbelievable, frankly.
It shows a lack of competition.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think my bigger issue is that in the markets that you alluded to, which, these international highly competitive markets, they have some new planes, like they have some 787s that they fly, and the fit outs on them and the service on them and like the kind of influx at I think their economy, maybe premium business.
Yep.
Like
right.
they're pretty bad compared to the competition that's flying the same routes.
Just depends which routes you're talking about. I think. It's a pretty good product, but it's not brand new anymore. That's for sure.
I think Qantas is a top 10 product.
I think if you read,
I think that's fair.
You think top 10?
It's not Qatar, but
all right, but top 10, that's not
but you can
great.
Qatar, Emirates, SQ.
Top 10, and bear in mind that a lot of the other 10 are state-owned airlines, so it is actually pretty good, but it is, in fairness, not as good as it used to be.
When have you flown a Qantas flight, say, out of Dallas or via New York via Auckland or something like that?
I'm in LA.
So
That's a long.
It's a long flight on a I think an experience.
But on those routes, you're up against American, United, Delta, and Qantas definitely holds its own against those airlines.
It's a very technical airline conversation, but like Delta's what's it called, Delta One, which they still call business, which is a suite with a door that closes.
You're obsessed with doors.
I know everyone loves doors. Everyone loves doors.
It's actually just a business class seat with a door.
Yeah, well that's all right. That's good.
I hate doors. They annoy me.
You can leave it open. You know how doors work? They open, they close. You can leave them open.
No, they're shut.
Adir, let me tell you this. I do not think Vanessa Hudson's legacy will rise and fall on a door.
I'm telling you, it will be the biggest story in Australian aviation if she puts doors on, even on first class. Just put a door on it.
Well, and the A350 1000
it looks amazing.
Will have doors, and that first class product is a direct rip-off of JAL's A350 first class.
Right.
Well, they haven't got theirs yet, but I suspect it's similar.
Yeah.
But JAL's already got it operating in the air. I've flown it to Tokyo and then to New York. Absolutely unbelievable. It's like sitting in a cinema. And those are going to fly. For Qantas is going to fly them from Sydney to New York and Sydney to London.
That's great.
No stops.
I'm all in favour of ripping stuff off. In Melbourne, we've got a public transport system where you can't tap a credit card to get on a train because we didn't rip off somebody else's system. I'm all in favour of ripping stuff off.
That's like everyone in the world has that.
Great.
It's a bus case anyway.
All right, so
can we move on?
Can I lead into this Rampart thing by saying, so Rampart obviously is your great, I want to use the word that you use to describe what it is. Because it's not a newsletter, it's, what do you call it?
Well, it is a newsletter. It's a finance business subscription publication, and if you're a subscriber, you get the beginning of the article sent to you by email newsletter. Yeah,
which you might roll your eyes at what I'm about to say, but I think it's kind of genius the amount of it that you provide for free, because you're not stingy with it. It's enough there for somebody to like learn something and have a laugh, but also want to read more. Like I think too many publications are too stingy with the amount of content they release in front of.
It's interesting. That's interesting you say that. On the way here in the cab, I was arguing with my team about where to put the paywall on this morning's article. So it is a constant battle. Like, well, if we don't give them anything, then that nothing will sort of drag them in. But then again, you don't want to give away. You get abuse from subscribers who say, "I'm paying for this. Why are you giving away so much?"
I never notice.
So
I never
look
to see what you're giving away free. I go straight to click the login and read the whole thing.
Yeah, and that's the other
thing.
Got
to take more of an interest in business, Adam. This is all about customer acquisition.
My point is I'm not offended by people getting it.
Yeah, that's a ridiculous complaint.
Yeah, I think so.
Ridiculous.
Oh, well, that particular subscriber, and you sort of got to be careful with anecdotal feedback.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
That one particular subscriber was complaining to me about the amount of the sort of punchlines or good bits that we put on Instagram.
Right.
And it's like, well, they're just some, it's just some of the fears to get people to go, oh, maybe I'll go take a look at that, or to remind people who have long been readers of mine that that's that Joe thing. I must go and sign up.
It's so ridiculous.
You just always have to question this stuff.
I'm not paying per word when I subscribe. Like, what are they? I think it's ridiculous, but I think.
But remember, bear in mind that my biggest funnel for conversions is the people who are on the free list.
Yeah,
of course.
It's every time I do an article, a certain number of them go convert to paid, and they go.
I don't know how much you can disclose, but can you give us any sort of metrics?
Do you want me to say the great thing I was going to say in the lead-in, which is, that's one great thing. But someone I don't want to say the person's name, but someone who you know who it is, in the media industry that's very senior, said to me,
hallowed media person.
They consider them and their entire very large organisation considers this essential reading. And so I think, that is high praise. Like whatever you were setting out to, we know what you're setting out to do. You've certainly at least achieved, if not more, what you were setting out to do, which is pretty incredible. In a very short time.
Yeah, it's obviously very gratifying to have sort of said, I'm just going to do this, and then it's in 12 weeks it's happened.
Yeah.
So I have only been going for 3 months.
Is that all? It feels way longer than that.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Probably more so for you, but yeah.
But obviously it's still early days, and I guess now you just have to keep pushing and waiting and just be patient and let that sort of growth occur. You know, there's still lots of people who are getting around to signing up or, you know, it's. I hope there's still lots of. I hope I haven't hit the growth ceiling. The scary thing about it is you don't know when you've hit it until you've hit it. So I'm sort of holding my breath, watching this growth rate of paid subscribers and going,
how has it
please keep going, but I don't know when it stops.
Has it been accelerating or is it linear?
No, you sort of go.
The beginning is the bit.
People already said to me, your first week will be your best ever, and that was the case.
Yep.
Like I think 600 or 700 people have signed up in the first week.
Yeah.
And then it sort of plateaus to much lower, but then it stays at that lower rate for quite a long time, and it's sort of come off a little bit, but not a lot.
Yeah,
I think you'll find this is why I've found certainly in our business is. Everything just gets easier. Assuming you're running a good business, that marketing gets easier, content gets easier, you get a better team. So I think the notion that it's really easy to start and it gets harder, I think that's actually the exact. Obviously, you eventually hit day 2 and your stuff, but like hopefully we don't think you're many years from that. But you'll get better at marketing, you'll get better at the funnel, you'll get better at converting free to paid. You'll get. I saw you've brought Ivor Rees, who's an incredible journo, who's doing an article a week for you.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Who I loved. I think it was Chanticleer.
He was an analyst as well at
He still is at Morgan's, right?
No, he retired from.
Okay.
That's right. He was a Catapult analyst at Morgan's.
Yeah.
He covered a lot of the tech stocks. So he would know you guys. Yeah.
So I think the fact that I imagine you're in the thousands now, and you must have a very significant. Can you say how many free subs you have?
I probably shouldn't.
Yeah. You can say.
We'll assume it's in the tens of thousands.
Yeah. No, it's not that big. No,
yeah, but
it's not that high. But I hope so.
How has it gone relative to your expectations?
Better.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah. I mean, I have an arbitrary number that I know of paid subscribers. I've never really cared that much about the free list, even though I should have thought more about it.
And you can still monetize the free ones, actually.
And the advertising's another revenue stream that we've got. But I had an arbitrary number of paid subscribers that I thought I needed to, pay myself what I used to make at 9 and be comfortable and have an office and have, be able to cover my expenses and not worry. And I'm more than 3/4 of the way to that number.
That's fantastic.
So
and you were famously the highest paid journo in the country as well. So it was a hefty target.
That was allegedly the case. But of course, then you get to the point of, how do I grow this? Because the one thing I'm trying to learn from other people in these sort of recurrent revenue businesses is the one thing I can't scale is myself.
Yeah.
And I'm overrun and I don't have enough time to think, write, plus handle advertisers and customer service and tech and all the other stuff. And so I need other journos. And I'm probably in a position where I can afford to bring in other journos. But the thing is, the universe of people who are good enough is really small. Not in journalism generally, but in finance and business.
And you've got you are a unique product. Like you're a unique product in Australia.
N equals 1.
Yeah, and so that's the challenge as well, right? Like I think the good news is that whilst you don't scale, your content scales. And so you have to, like Joe content can only be written by Joe. Yes. But at least once you write it, that scales.
What's media? Media is like a SaaS business.
One of the challenges is the same as our challenge in a sense, which is your content is not evergreen content. It is very timely and topical, which is the same as this podcast, frankly. It's not like Acquired where people can go back and listen to episodes from...
But don't you find that a lot of people... does it surprise you how much your back catalogue gets listened to?
20%.
Yeah. See, that
shocks me. Yeah, I'm shocked by that.
I only look recently because we're going to start monetizing that back catalogue soon. So previously we haven't.
I mean, you know this much better than I do, but what I got told by the Fin when I write articles is that, and this is why I think your subscribers will keep growing, is that individual articles that people are interested in drives a subscription.
Yes.
And so I think you'll keep writing these articles and each article will push the buttons of a certain number of new people, and then they'll join. And I think I'm trying to think about, like, I'm not very across our subscriber growth because I'm not across really anything on this podcast. But our subscriber, what did our curve look like? How do you describe our curve?
I'd say it's exponential now.
It's exponential now.
You sort of hit that point
because we advertise.
We're doing a little bit of it, not like $100 a day.
So what drove it to grow strongly? Do you think? I should tell Joe that because
I actually don't know. Well, we're free.
You're an advertising-driven product, like
as in our growth is
revenue for advertising.
Yes,
yeah, of course.
So you're going for a maximum audience, whereas I'm not really interested in. I'm more interested in. I'm not interested in people who don't want to pay.
So you want paid subscribers. Yeah, I think we are a non-commercially driven enterprise because we've got other jobs. Right? Like it's not
I think going back to your product. I was always a massive fan of yours, as a lot of people were who read The Fin. I think your product now is almost better. Feels like you're a bit freer. Do you find you're a bit less bridled than you were at The Fin?
Well, I never felt bridled at The Fin at all. So I don't think that's a reflection of sort of some mindset of editorial freedom or like potential content conflict or anything like that. I think my biggest issue at The Fin was I was having to write every day, and that affects the quality of the input because and look, in fairness, by the time I got to 2023 before I left, I was just saying I'm not writing 5 days this week. I'm going to do 3.
Yeah,
and I just had to sort of go with that. But but now I can, and that's the great thing about not having a print newspaper, which you can't just leave an empty space on the Rear Window page on the print newspaper, but you can on a website. You can just say, well, I'm not doing something today because I don't have anything that's polished enough or ready enough for me to put my name to it. And that's the great thing about Rampart is I can say I'm going to I need 2 days to work on this or 3 days to work on this. And having said that, because I spent 12 years with that just invisible pressure of like get it out, get it out,
deadline pressures. Yeah.
On the days where I am taking, on the weeks where I am taking 2 or 3 days to do something, I feel sort of not good, and so I'm sort of grappling with that. Like I'm sort of pushing myself in a way that I don't like to sort of get stuff out when I should just be calming down about it.
Is the 2 or 3 days thinking time predominantly?
Thinking, research, calling, everything.
Yeah.
And the other thing that drives it, if I'm being perfectly honest, is you get lots of new subscription ads every time you publish. So that's the other thing. Like you become addicted to the revenue surge.
Yeah.
And with things like Stripe apps, it's like it gamifies the
whole subscription.
I'm like, oh my God, I've only made $500 today or something, and it's just, it's a catastrophe. So that sort of is a very unhealthy driver of output. So I'm really struggling not to get sucked into that hole.
Yeah, the renewals will feel different because at the moment you get people that sign up and then they pay, and when you don't publish, you don't get those. Mm-hmm. But then this wave of renewals will come through, and
I'm going to have a massive cliff and this really surprises me. Fully 2/3 of my subscribers have paid 12 months in advance.
I'm not surprised by that at all.
They get a
what's your discount?
They get a 15% discount to do that, but so it's more expensive to pay per month. But only 1/3 of people have done that, and those people churn off at about 2 to 3%.
That's pretty good churn.
It's that's
better than Netflix.
Oh right, well there you go.
It's about 5%,
which is a lot cheaper.
And Peacock and those ones are like 8%.
Because I think the theory is the higher the price, the higher the churn. But again, it's been 12 weeks, so it's very early to be sort of. I wouldn't call that my stable churn.
That's outstanding. Like as a subscriber,
there's no competitors. Like Netflix has got competitors.
Well, I have.
You have but you have got no.
That's not really
the competitor to you is not buying you. There's nothing that I can replace your content with if I don't buy your content.
Well, I think the AFR would argue that you're getting very adjacent stuff to what I do.
They would be wrong if they would argue that. I think the AFR is. Like they've got their own good content. I've got some other views about the AFR, like them changing the format of not having sections, but you're not going to want to comment on that. But we both love the AFR. But I think AFR content, there's a reason. Whatever you got paid, there was a reason you got paid that. It's because your content was different to everything else that was in that newspaper. So
every newspaper, not just AFR.
I don't agree that you're substitutable by AFR content.
Well, look, the AFR is the best media business in Australia.
It is,
and I envy their position in the market. And
it's good that Nine's got one good business.
Yeah, exactly. Correct.
Decent business.
What's that? Yeah, I know. I'm being facetious, but yeah.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, but you maybe wouldn't want to own the other newspapers in the stable. Like they're tough businesses, and
they're worth something.
I wouldn't have minded owning Domain. You know, I tell you this story. We don't have to comment on this, but I wrote this piece that was a Domain piece about everything that went on, and like you can't write about Domain without writing about the last 5 years of Domain, and it went through a very tortuous road inside that organisation, and I could never figure out whether that was related to the fact they were owned by Nine or not. But I think that's a business I would, that was the jewel in the crown, and the Fin Review is probably the media jewel in their crown, I think. So. Yeah.
Well, I just hope that Nine's management doesn't manage to do to the AFR what it did to Domain.
Yeah.
That was quite shocking.
Shocking.
Well, hopefully I don't hire Jason Pellegrino to run that.
Can I talk about what? I just want to say I'm going to distance myself from that remark. Whenever I don't pay, my mind drifted to wanting to ask you the next question about Rampart, so I wasn't exactly entirely listening to what Adam was saying. I just caught the tail end, and I'm like, every time I don't listen to something completely, I get that surprise. So I wanted to talk about one piece that you wrote that I thought was just fascinating, which was there was a bank CEO, a new bank CEO. We can say who the bank CEO was.
The new head of the business bank
of
at
NAB,
NAB, Andrew Auerbach.
And he's said essentially, I was looking for the quote, but I don't have the quote, but his comments were essentially, they weren't comments to you, right? They were general comments that you...
On his own podcast.
On his own podcast.
With his wife.
Which was basically, I'm not here for life. If it doesn't work out, I'll just go and do something different.
Yeah.
And my view on that, I wrote this, is I would never hire a CEO that came with that attitude. I would only hire a CEO where some part of their sense of self-worth was connected to doing well in the business that I was chairing. And so that was what do you make? I mean, you wrote about him, but it's interesting to what do you make about that?
So to give context to your listeners, he's a Canadian sort of private wealth guy.
Yeah.
Who ran private wealth at the Bank of Montreal, where Andrew Irvin, who is the CEO of NAB, also worked. So
which is a good sign that he brought a guy that he'd worked with previously across to the bank. No?
Well, is it? I mean, I think it's a sign that he brought someone he knew. I think that's the only sign that it is. And I think my argument was more that it's more of a social appointment than it is a capability appointment.
because
why
you say that?
While I think Andrew Auerbach would be probably a very good CEO of NAB's private bank, he's also
I see what you mean.
Running the business bank, which NAB used to be NAB's. Speaking of
jewels, that was the jewel in the crown for sure.
The best business bank in Australia by to quote Richard Goyder, the length of a straight. And it's now under siege by the Commonwealth Bank. And it's in fact very close to being run down. So I think now the predecessor running until 12 months ago, Andrew Irvin himself was running the business bank of NAB. So look, it's an interesting appointment, but these big four banks are huge, bureaucratic, political organisations, sort of these massive utilities, and it fascinates me the kind of people who end up at the top of them. Some of them, not many of them, but some of them are very, very skilled, but most of them are found out and shown to be quite mediocre. And the market generally, I talk to the analysts, speak to plenty of the big portfolio managers in Aussie equities, and the jury is genuinely out. This is genuinely an open-minded question that people in the market are asking themselves: is Andrew Irvin any good at NAB?
Yeah.
And this appointment just shocked people because this guy's Andrew Auerbach. I'm not trying to say the guy's not a lovely guy. He's got his podcast with his wife and they talk about cupcakes, and he just comes across as so naive and clueless to the kind of snake pit that he's coming into. Melbourne is not Australia, I should say. Australian business is not particularly open to outsiders or to the perspectives of international people. The number of foreign executives who come in here and succeed is very few.
Your mate from Rio Tinto, case in point.
Yeah, well, I think that's right.
Sol Trujillo he was hammered, right? I mean, when you look back, Sol Trujillo, when you look back,
he was a real asshole.
I know, but when they called him the three amigos, Mexican, when you look back about that, it maybe was not the most appropriate nicknames
for it. Yeah, that wasn't perfect. I agree, but I mean, he was a real pig. I mean, he basically didn't even live in Australia. You know, he had a button on his desk to call the elevator, so he didn't even have to wait for it.
I find it disappointing.
True story at Telstra headquarters.
I'm disappointed that story didn't end when he pushed it, like a thing opened underneath whoever he was sitting with. The Monty Burns approach
Dr.
to life.
Evil. Yeah, exactly. But you know,
that is basically it is crazy that button under the desk.
It's relevant consideration that he's coming from overseas to run a bank that's in a division of the bank that's in real trouble, and it's questionable whether he's really qualified to do it. And you remember, Westpac hired a foreign head of their business bank. He's a Brazilian. His name was Gil Lima.
Okay, I don't think I know this.
And he started in late 20. He lasted about 15 months. Is the story, right? He lasted a very short space of time because we don't in Australia. We're not particularly open to foreigners coming in and I'm not saying that's a good thing, by the way.
Yeah.
So that's anyway. This is a very long description of the story, but
But it is weird to say, if it doesn't work, I don't really care. I'll just go and do something else. Like that is not a great first day, right?
No,
I think generally in my...
By the way, him and his wife have adopted the Richmond Tigers, but they've said we don't really like sport.
Yeah.
And I'm like, great, move to Melbourne. Yeah. Great place not to like sport.
Not the right city for you. But I do think, I will say the counter narrative on hiring someone that he knows, notwithstanding it might not be the right person to run it, is I once had someone leading a business and I said to them after 6 months, why are there not more people that you've worked with previously in your executive team now? Like they're the most reliable people you've seen deliver in the past. And this guy said to me, I'm not sure I'm going to stay, so I don't want to bring my team yet. I mean, that was like, he's
got the same attitude as that.
Unbelievable. You did not look very supportive when I said it's a good sign bringing people that you've worked with before because you've seen them deliver.
I have cynicism about the CEOs who bring their troop with them wherever they go, and that's also a bit of a thing. You know, in fact, Jane Hardlick is a great example. You know, brings her team to A2 Milk, then they go to Virgin. I don't mean to pick on her; it's just one that came into my mind. But there's lots of examples of CEOs who do that.
But what if you've seen them consistently deliver for you, and there's not the risk of hiring someone new? Because that's my take on it.
Yeah, but look, sure, that's fine. That's fair. What's not great is CEOs sort of having transplants. And that's not the way to build...
sycophants, essentially, coming along with it.
Well, it depends on the circumstances, but I don't think that you build sustainable, good organisational culture and performance by transplanting people in that stay only as long as you do.
Yeah, I think if I was ever crazy enough to become CEO of a business, and let's say I got put in there and there were internal candidates that had wanted to have the job, I would offer them almost anything to stay. Like, I think this idea that the best people, you have 3 great people in an organisation that, let's say it's a really well-performing organisation, they've delivered it, one of them becomes the next CEO, the other 2 leave. To me, that's a terrible outcome. Like, I would offer them almost anything to stay. So I agree with you about the transplant. Like, if a business is doing well, you don't want to transplant the whole executive team. Like, there's a lot of knowledge that's built up there.
And some businesses need wholesale change. You know, there's sometimes you come in as a CEO and that's what you need to do. But I mean, NAB was performing the best that it has performed in 25 years when Andrew Irvin took over. Let's not forget that Ross McEwen took an absolutely shithouse bank and got it moving again.
Well, he would be one of your people that you would say he's an outstanding bank CEO, I suspect.
Ross McEwen, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Matt Common is another one. But you look over at ANZ, which I think has been poorly run for a long time, and then they've brought in a foreign external hire. So that's an even bigger thing, not just to run a division, to run the whole group. Yeah. And no doubt, I suspect he'll clean out a lot of the next rung down. And then what happens? Do we get all of his mates from HSBC? I mean, I don't know. I don't want to predict.
Well, Mike Smith essentially was a foreign exec who probably had a challenge.
From HSBC.
Yeah.
I mean, he was like an HSBC lifer, I think.
And Gail Kelly was South African, wasn't she?
Yeah, but she'd been
here for a long time. She ran St George.
Badly. And then ran Westpac even worse. So that was
her legacy is not...
Cleopatra.
It's not looking great, you know, this 10, 12 years on, that's for
sure.
Well,
it's even more. It's probably 15 years on now.
She left 2015.
Oh, I'm talking about the St George Westpac
Yeah,
acquisition.
that merger was effected around 2013, I think.
I thought it was a bit earlier.
She's kind of disappeared from corporate life in Australia.
Yeah.
She retired and
Yeah,
got
but
carried
like-
off. I think she carried off as Cleopatra
In a sedan chair.
Yeah, exactly. Can I just move on to a different topic while we got Joe?
Yes, but can I ask a question apropos of nothing to Joe?
Yeah, sure.
Does everybody take your calls? Because I would think if Joe is calling me and I don't know Joe and I'm in Australian business, I would much rather take that call than not take that call, would be my sentiment.
Yeah, well, look, I don't know that I'm the right person to comment on that.
Well, you know your hit
Well, have
rate
you
of
been
getting
hung up on?
people. Yeah, like, I mean, I presume that most people, like when you're saying you spend 2 to 3 days researching, talking to people,
Yeah.
etc., I assume it's relatively straightforward for you to get through to the people you need to get through to.
Yeah, look, the great thing about Australia is it's a small market.
Very small,
There
yeah.
isn't really a company director or a CEO whose number I can't get if
Yeah.
I want to. And I think the smart ones engage.
Yeah.
I think I've been in this business for long enough for people to understand if you have a private conversation with me, that's how it stays.
It stays private, yeah.
And it's always better to get your perspective across so that I can take it into account than not to. And you can't complain afterwards if you haven't.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, just because a CEO privately says, but A, B, and C means that I'm going to completely change my view of things,
Yeah.
but I will take it into account. And those people who have participated in that process, I believe, would accept that. But yeah, look, there's different perspectives, and there's a cottage industry of PR people who run around justifying their own roles by playing blocker and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, and that's their business. But I have sort of people are entitled to do whatever they want to do. I mean, I'm going to say what I'm going to say. I'm just trying to gather the full picture.
If you're
but
right,
I don't have many issues talking to the
having
people I want to talk to.
conversations. And
Yeah.
would you, and if you're going to write about someone, will you generally reach out to them before you write about them? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if there are circumstances where I wouldn't, but like for instance, if I'm quoting something that someone has said in a
publicly,
newspaper, then I don't need to. I
Confirm
don't
it with
think I need to confirm that that's
I
accurate.
agree.
But if I'm sort of going to characterise their general performance over a long period of time, that might be something that I certainly want to engage in.
Yeah.
Moving on, another topic that we actually want to speak about a couple of weeks, and it's perfect that you're in because you've written about it, and that's the big news in the managed fund sector with Adir's mates at L1 trying to merge or take over, I guess you could say, Platinum, which was historically the best performed fund manager for a period of time and hasn't been for.
Well, when you
15
talk
years
about
now.
people who were like golden CEOs,
Yeah,
I mean,
Nielsen.
that is, you talk about Hamish Douglas,
Africa
but
goes well.
Kurt Nielsen is the pinnacle of it,
Hamish
right?
just copied
Yeah.
Ken
Yeah.
Nielsen,
Yeah.
and he wouldn't
Yeah.
like that to be said, but I think that's fair. He was the OG, Ken,
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
doubt about it.
Yeah.
The one question, I haven't spoken to Mark or Rafi about this, but I would love to know, and maybe I should call them and find out, how did they get Ken Nielsen on the hook? Like, that's the
Yeah.
really interesting question, right? Because as we know, I think the AFR wrote this. The meeting between Regal and Ken Nielsen lasted 60 seconds. He was like, not interested in this at all. So he's not sort of open-minded to anyone just coming in for a swing. So, and by the way, Kerr should respect Rafi and Mark.
For sure,
Their
that's
achievements
right.
are really phenomenal,
Yeah.
and they're great money managers. I don't necessarily agree with their views on governance, but Kerr quite rightly should have entertained their approach. But wouldn't it be interesting to understand, to have been a fly on that wall?
Did his
Can I
former
give some background into what's happening here? Because for our listeners, we haven't.
Can you answer this question before you give background? Did his former wife, when she divorced him and she took shares and whatever, did she end up making more money out of Platinum
Yeah.
than he did? Much
Oh,
more,
way
right?
more.
Much
Way
more.
more.
Because she sold all of the shares.
Mark wrote a
Correct.
great article about that. She made $300 million and he made 60.
Right.
So it's a
Yeah.
so just what's happening in terms of this background here. So Platinum, which was the original sort of value fund manager in Australia, they came out of
Original international equities manager.
they came out of BT, right? I think it was Bank Construction, that sort of golden era when they basically picked the crash of 87, I think. So under the deal, L1, which is a privately held fund manager that Adir is very close to the guys.
Has many billions of dollars under management.
Yeah, so they'll own 75% of the combined business. Basically a way for them to backdoor into Platinum's listing. L1 was founded in 2007 by Rafi Lam, who was formerly at Cooper Investors, which was a great fund manager run by Peter Cooper, who's now back in... Yeah, he's now having to come and fix things up. And Mark Lando, who worked at Invesco. The firm initially managed Australian equities and has branched out to global equities, hedge fund and activism strategies, and runs a British property fund, which I didn't know about.
I remember when they raised their first money.
I think his brother runs it.
Yeah, they raised their first money. They raised 50 mil from, I think it was like Catholic Super or something like that. And it was like they couldn't believe they had got this money. And like, I mean, it's a long time ago now, but I just remember that moment of like, we're going to give this a go and see if it works. And this $50 million check dropped on them, basically.
So Platinum itself has been a disaster since iconic founder Kerr Nelson stepped down. Its funds under management has dropped from $25 billion in 2019, which actually wasn't that long ago, to $11 billion now. And its market cap is a pitiful $400 million, which is actually staggering. It was founded back in 1994 with backing from George Soros. And when the business was listed on the ASX, or when it listed on the ASX, it was valued at $2.9 billion. And Nielsen owned a 57% stake. It actually peaked at $9.15 in 2015 and is now trading at a measly 56 cents. Which
is he still a chief investment officer or not?
No, he's out.
He's long gone.
It basically went
once he stopped picking stocks, exactly. It went down. Okay.
Which is a real problem with managed fund. And we can talk about this in terms of L1, but shares are off 90% in 4 years. So this has been just a disaster. Similar to Magellan, actually worse than Magellan, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's different in that Hamish oversaw the collapse in performance.
Yeah,
it wasn't after he left. But look, it's the same theme, isn't it? These businesses, what are they worth without their talismans? And Platinum, you got to remember, like these days, you and I can jump on the phone and buy American shares, and that the Platinum came to existence when that wasn't the case. It's like your average person couldn't buy Microsoft very easily, and so they operated in a different era in that respect. But yeah, their performance, active management has gotten very, very hard over that time that Platinum has sort of fallen down the hole as well. But I mean, like the L1 deal, well played to L1 if they can get that over the line, because they're getting it for a steal.
I think they'll get it.
Is there an element of falling knife about it?
Well, that depends. I mean, look, I think that is the question, but I would say there's huge costs in Platinum to be stripped out, because like they've got a good distribution system, and there's elements of that I think L1 probably doesn't have and should keep, not at the sort of scale that L1 is now thinking about operating at. But if they can quickly sort of take over the portfolio construction of these Platinum funds, and hold on to even half of the funds under management, they've got an amazing deal, because the fees on those are, retail type of sticky,
which is
high
L1's
management
magic.
fee. And of course, they've been getting no performance fee for a long time. But if they start to perform like L1 funds, they'll start to get big performance fees, a lot like the performance fees on L1's LIC. And so. But again, that's a big if. Is it too late? Like, there's a long lag effect on some of these redemptions. So often you'll find there'll be a lot of Platinum funds clients who are actually waiting for an uptick to redeem, because they don't want to redeem now at its absolute lowest. So in some ways, L1 could get the funds going.
Yeah, and then get the redemption.
Lose all of these clients.
We talk a lot about powers on the show. So this is Hamilton with 7 powers, and businesses. There were 7 powers that allow businesses to make outsized profits versus competitors. So the classic Warren Buffett moat. And I think you look at Platinum or call it fund managers in general, and they've got very limited powers.
Yeah.
When they're going well, they've got brand, and Platinum had great brand. And you can argue they had a bit of cornered resource in Kerr when he was running it. Kerr goes, lose the cornered resource.
It's not really a cornered resource, because it's totally substitutable with another good fund manager.
No, but it's not. Clearly, it wasn't.
But as a customer who puts money in like a fund, I can go to Kerr, or there are probably 4 or 5 other also good stock pickers. Like, it's not really a cornered resource.
I think the view is that
I think it has no power.
Cornered resource.
It has no power.
Well, there is no power when he leaves. Clearly.
Well, I don't think there's even a power when he's there. I think these businesses have no power.
Okay,
and
that was the point I was getting to.
I think they've. What's also happened in the time from when Kerr was in his glory days to now is that that active managers don't make the market like they used to.
Yeah.
Either. So they're really sort of carried along. And Phil King's great at trading momentum, and that's sort of his style. But if you're the old days of like Perpetual or BT, like moving the market with what they're doing in active management, those days are over.
Yeah.
So
Totally
that
agree.
is to their disadvantage as well.
So
What the hell is-
you've got a business with minimal powers,
Yeah, I know,
and you've got the L1 guys, the great stock pickers, buying a business with minimal power. It feels like it's a counterintuitive
No,
move
but
for
you
them
think
to
about
make.
It's a liquidity move for them. Like they're getting their business onto the listed market so they can get liquidity.
Can they sell down?
Well,
Surely them
I'm
selling
not
down
sure.
is not a
Of course they
great
can.
sign.
Of course
I'm
they
not
can.
sure that
They wouldn't be doing it if they couldn't.
You know, this article. Firstly, can we just say this? Kurt Nielsen, he gets divorced. His wife takes 300 mil of stock. He's still primarily his net worth is tied up in these shares. The hell is he doing stepping down from being the CIO of this business? Like, why did he step back?
He's 70 something. I mean, what's he going to
Well,
do?
but he wasn't when he stepped back,
We
was
should
he?
have-
Or he
No,
was?
he should have sold down at the time.
Yeah, he should. Like, I mean, like if you're not,
I see what you're saying.
if you're the active manager that's made all of this happen, and you think, I'm sure he thinks he's better than other people at picking stocks, then what in the hell is he doing holding on
That
to
was
shares
strange. That was
in
really
somebody
strange.
else's hands?
Yeah.
Like,
If I was him, I would have sold
it's
it that way.
bizarre. I don't. So I might eat these words, and I don't know if like this is not really a disclosure. It's just a statement. Like I know Mark and Rafi very well. Yoni Bashan in the Oz wrote exactly what you just said, which is it's a liquidity move because they want to whatever, and Rafi wants to move to Israel, right? Which
Well, I didn't say that.
I know you didn't say that. Yoni said that. I don't think that's true at all. But basically, I'm not sure. These guys are they're young and they're still
They're your age, right?
They're even
in
a
their
bit
late
slightly
40s.
younger than me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they're very committed to L1
Yeah.
and they've managed
But
to get retail fees on enormous amounts of money. I don't think, and they keep reinvesting almost all of the management fees back into their stake in L1 funds. Yeah. I don't think that. Maybe you're not suggesting it's imminent that they want to sell down.
I think there's some nuance here. I'm saying it is definitely a liquidity move. I am not saying that Mark and Rafi want to sell all of their shares.
Yeah, you don't
and
think
leave
it's a
tomorrow.
short-term liquidity
No,
move? Yeah,
of course
okay,
not.
all right, fair
but
enough.
it's not only a liquidity move for them; it's a liquidity move for their top talent. Like if you're their PMs, they get a little bit of a clip of these huge dividends that they pay, that L1 pays the shareholders, but they can't sell any of the actual shares that generate those dividends, so they can't. There's no crystallization of that value available to them, and of course, you want to be able to offer that to the best talent in town.
I agree. By the way, they already had a couple of PMs that made too much money and went off to live other lives, right? Like that is a problem in these businesses.
Is there an argument these businesses shouldn't be listed?
Well, there's an argument that lots of businesses shouldn't be listed, right? Like,
It just doesn't feel like
should investment banks be listed? Like,
I don't think
should
they should
law firms be listed? That hasn't gone
Absolutely
well.
not. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
I think all these professional service firms don't make sense as listed businesses. There's very.
I mean,
you
law
probably
fir-
say Blackstone and some of those PE firms have done pretty well as listed entities, but take them out. There've been very few. And obviously, Berkshire is essentially
And the signal, you've got to follow this price signals of everything. Would you rather be a fund client of an unlisted L1 or of a listed L1? And I don't mean this in any. This is just objectively the case. You would feel more. You're always going to feel safer, where without the available prospect of your star fund manager being able to sell their shares and leave. Like that's just a fact.
Yeah.
And Hamish Douglas proved. I've never sold a single share in Magellan. We have no intention of ever selling any shares in Magellan. He sold almost every share he had in Magellan.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Definitely.
Now, I'm not saying that that's what the L1 guys intend to do, but it's just a fact that that if you can liquidate your position, then if that's an option available to you, that's a bad thing for the client. But that it's also if you're the fund manager, a completely legitimate and reasonable aspiration.
Of course. But you know a lot of fund managers, like we all know a lot, presumably like some of them. Notwithstanding that, it is a very strange profession.
Yeah, I dislike lots of them and also respect them.
Yeah.
So it's sort of...
But this business of effectively, I mean, an entire industry that's been driven largely by compulsory superannuation in this country, with enormous annual fee flows out of Australian superannuation funds into the funds of fund managers.
And private wealth,
And private wealth. And
just the wealth boat.
Yeah.
And then effectively it's a business where I'm going to put some money over here for a bit. And then when I bring it back, I want to be able to bring back more money, and then I'm going to keep a little bit of that money, and no one's kind of going to notice because I'm making money. I mean, it is a bit of a bizarre thing that this has become such an enormous, super profitable industry in Australia. And L1, you can't say negative things about them because they make money delivering outperformance. Yep. But there's a ton of fund managers that have become very rich on delivering underperformance.
Oh, totally. There's no doubt about that.
What's the majority of them? 75% underperform market statistically.
And there's some just fantastic mythology around that people spin around themselves. You know, everyone says, everyone considers himself a disciple of Warren Buffett. Charlie Munger. I mean, if I had $1 for every fund manager who told us about the time that they met Charlie Munger at Omaha, it's like, here we go.
Yeah.
And they all sort of really labour how down to earth they are. You know, Hamish Douglas caught the bus to work.
Malcolm Turnbull.
And none of them pay themselves anything, and they live off the smell of an oily rag. There's so much myth making around it, which is part of the fun for me, of these people who and it's also the case with a really highly numerate, like hypernumerate cohort of people. You have a lot of people who tend to lack people skills.
While we've got you, you've written really well. In fact, you probably really broke this story, I think. The James Hardie Affix, is that Affix?
AZEC.
The James Hardie AZEC deal, which you wrote about in the Fin and obviously in Rampart as well, in probably possibly the most controversial takeover in Australian history, because really does the business drop 50% or whatever.
Adam doesn't have many settings. There's like the worst in history and the best in history, the biggest or the smallest in history. So definitely we'll say the biggest in history.
Can you remember a takeover costing the acquirer 40% of their market cap in a month?
That's not great.
Yeah. Again, it's because I can't remember one, does that mean that it never happened? It's a good question. I mean, it's certainly in terms of the dilution without a shareholder vote, has a precedent in the Perpetual Pendle takeover.
Yeah.
And that was a real shocker. Perpetual issued 98% more of its shares to buy Pendle without a shareholder vote for Perpetual shareholders.
And
because it was so far down the boards, that was like an ASX 300.
Yeah.
So there wasn't much of a reaction. But now we're talking about James Hardie, which is an ASX 20 company.
Well, let me say this for people that are not across this stuff. So, like at Catapult, if we want to issue more than 15% of shares, we effectively have to
every
get
ASX company
approval from shareholders to be able to do it. And
unless it's a reverse takeover, and there's like all these listing rules, which is extremely complicated. But if it's happening from a foreign company with a listing that is considered, the ASX considers to be compliant with Australian rules.
So basically there's a rule which is totally appropriate, which is that if you're going to dilute shareholders too badly, which is 15% in this case, you've got to make them have a chance to say whether they want it or not.
Except there's an asterisk.
Unless the
ASX decides to give you a waiver, which unfortunately the ASX will do willy-nilly.
Well, I remember when I was a lawyer 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. You couldn't get waivers. And remember, as lawyers, you have to work, these are the rules. How do we work around the rules? It feels like something's really just drastically changed the ASX. I just want to go to a quick clip. So on the Fin podcast, so James Thompson and my friend Joey Smolarkis did a great bit on this topic. And I love JT, but this is, I thought, pretty interesting. He actually did an interview. I'll throw that podcast now.
Where we had Daniel Moran, who's the Chief Compliance Officer at the ASX there, and I asked him about the James Hardie furore. Daniel, what's some of your reflections on this James Hardie episode and the review of the listing rules? But I think we need to understand the complexities and make sure that we don't end up in a situation that's worse than the one we're in. And he was actually quite interesting on it. We're basically the ref. And I think it's reasonable to say the last thing anyone wants the ref to do is to change the rules in the middle of the game. I do have a bit of sympathy for the ASX. Often our investors are calling for them to...
So this was one of the most... I like JT. I think he's a great journo, but I don't know what happened here.
What do you mean they're the ref? I mean, the ASX is supposed to be the ref because they have rules, and that's what refs do. They apply the rules. The problems with this analogy is that Daniel Moran is a referee who goes, actually, I'll use my discretion to decide whether or not I'll apply the rules. So it's a completely inapposite
That was the point. He was saying we can't change the rules. He did change the rules.
Well, he waived the rules
Yeah.
at his discretion with no explanation and in secret. That's the other thing. The ASX did not disclose that a waiver had been granted until after the outcry. So, I mean, this guy is really something.
So what do you think's going to happen with James Hardy? What's your guess of how it will play?
Impregnable.
Irreversible.
Yeah.
Much like you remember Musk wanted to get out of the
Yeah.
Twitter takeover.
Yeah.
They've done it under the same laws in Delaware. So there's no break fee. And they will be if James Hardy tried to back out of their ASX takeover, they would be taken to court and forced to complete.
Well, technically,
So
ASX could not give the waiver, and that would...
the waiver's been given.
But ASX could revoke the waiver,
And James Hardy would sue them and win.
Would they be able to sue the ASX? Presumably,
I say that with such conviction.
Yeah.
Like I'm a corporate lawyer, but
You sound like someone who has never been, unfortunately, involved in commercial litigation to the judgments.
I would have thought the ASX could change that if they wanted to.
how would you grant a waiver which then pursuant to you have
was
given
used as
that
the
waiver,
basis of
it was the waiver being given was the basis of a transaction that then occurred,
Yeah.
and then say no, we're not giving you the waiver.
I agree with that. But the question,
I'm not so sure.
the question is, well, you're the lawyer.
Yeah, exactly.
But the question is, do you think that they went and did this particular structure of deal because they were worried about the unusual nature of this, and therefore, because it's not a typical kind of deal to go to Delaware and do this irrevocable.
Well, it's not that
deal.
Atypical, to be honest.
Right,
I mean,
okay.
if you want to get it done, I mean, boiling it down, James Hardy has bought a company that is a pretty good company. The issue is, no one's sort of saying it's a crap company. The issue is they've massively overpaid for it.
It's not doing amazing.
And by
well.
James Hardy's own admission 2 days ago, the US housing market is shitting itself.
Yeah.
So the timing, and they've levered the bejesus out of themselves to buy it. It's stock and cash. So they've bought it at the absolute top of the market for an epic price, just as the market's turning, the housing market's turning. And why would you do that?
Yeah.
Well, now the issue here is James Hardy has slowly become an American company under the noses of its Australian investors. There used to be multiple Australian directors on the board. Now there's one. And there's got a US chairman who has never worked in an international sector. She has always worked in the domestic American market. Her and her fellow directors can't be asked coming down to Australia to deal with AGMs and shareholders. And they have an American CEO. And they've had an American CEO for a long time, in fairness. But this is an American CEO, and the ASX takeover, the company chairman of that company is someone he worked with in the past. It's a matey type of social deal, and Aaron Erter, the CEO of James Hardy, is paid like a Rothschild. He makes US 24 mil is his rem, and that's been approved by Australian shareholders, by the way. But he wants to get more than that, and that's just not really. That's hardly getting out of bed money in the US corporate market. And the only thing that's stopping him from getting paid 50 is that his rem has to be voted on by Australian shareholders because it's an Australian listed company primarily. So the kicker with this deal is not only it's their way of getting out of Australia and escaping the Australian listing rules, so that their management can just issue whatever number of shares they want to each
I
other.
thought the classic thing there was they've got, we won't move our listing. We promise you won't move our listing. Like, is there any chance they won't move that? Surely it's got to be a 0% chance they won't. They're lying here.
Yeah, I don't see it. Will apply for their foreign exempt listing status as soon as they can, and it would be consistent with everything the ASX has done to date for that to be granted.
Is there a person who's more likely to be fired than Helen Lofthouse on the ASX, given her shareholders are the same shareholders and she's completely dudded as part of this transaction?
I have no confidence in the leadership of the ASX at all.
This is not even talking about the multiple stuff ups in terms of the whole chess thing. So even without this, it's been a complete debacle. Layer this in. I can't think of a more.
And by the way, she's got the other executive. I can't remember his name, who's also on the direct report of Helen Lofthouse's, running around saying that what they really need to do to attract more ASX listings is to have dual class structures like the US. And wouldn't that be great? I mean, like could you imagine how Richard White and Chris Ellison would treat their shareholders if they had super voting shares? I mean, it's bad enough as it is. The only reason that equities managers have any rights in Australia is because the News Corp experience in the 1990s ensured that the Australian market eschewed the dual class voting shares. I mean, it would just be a debacle. And if they're the kind of listings we want to attract, then that's not the way. I mean, my perspective, I always come at these stories from the perspectives of shareholders, not entrepreneurs. I know you guys might have a different perspective, but you've got to maintain the integrity of the market.
I think the difference there
I totally agree with that. I totally agree.
There is, if you buy into Snapchat, where Evan's got like 99% voting power, whatever he's got, you kind of know going in you buy into News Corp now in the US, you know Rupert's got a dominating stake. You've sort of buyer beware versus the James Hardy thing. We thought we were buying under one set of rules, and then the ASX goes, "Oh no, we're changing those rules." I think that's what makes it so egregious versus the US situation. I'm less bothered by dual.
And the ASX and James Hardy have each other. That's the other thing. No one can quite figure out who the villain is in this story. So the ASX goes, "Well, this is all James Hardy's fault," and James Hardy's going, "Hey, we just asked the regulator." So it allows them to sort of halve the burden of the ignominy, I suppose.
There's a lot of villains in this story.
I think that I just think about the James Hardy situation. Like I always try to break things down to a few little pieces. One is what they're buying and how much they're paying.
Yeah.
The second is why they're buying it. And the third is the structure that occurred in order to enable them to buy it in this way. And that's how I think about it. And I'm least concerned about what and how much they pay, because that's just a commercial decision. It might be a bad decision. Like I don't know. But like that, M&A happens all the time. It's much less about that. It's more about the kind of underlying factors.
Without a shareholder vote, though, I mean, that's the handbrake.
Well, that's the third bit of it, right? The structure for enabling it. I definitely think, I'm always put in these weird positions on this podcast because, like, chairing an ASX listed company, and it's a kind of sometimes gives me tricky conversations. But I definitely feel like governance. Making sure that governance is predictable and strong results in much better market caps for ASX listed companies because it gives investors much more confidence.
Yes.
And also, it worries me that it feels like the ASX is losing listings. And like, we don't want the ASX to end up to be a small exchange or an exchange that's just skewed to a particular type of listing or mining and banks. It was getting some momentum with tech companies for a while. It would be a shame for it to lose its momentum.
Mike, I think the counter argument to that is we don't want tech companies with deplorable governance.
Yes,
now, if
agreed.
that's the only way to growth, you'd rather not
No,
have
I
the
totally
growth.
agree with you.
And the other thing I would point out is that public listings are falling everywhere. I mean, that's a global trend. That's not an Australian trend.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, I mean, private capital. I mean, that's like the big trend at the moment, and that totally changes.
Private
things.
equity's been around a while, and obviously private debt's more recent. But
being able to just this volume of private capital that is floating around in the market means that like an ASX listing is much less appealing now. Yeah.
No, Joe, you've been amazing as always. I'm sure this will break records again. Congratulations on Rampart, which has been just an unbelievable. So I get the email and I save it for like the last thing to read, like I did with your Rear Window articles.
Thank you, Adam.
I always look forward to it.
Thank you for your loyalty.
It's really like fantastic content, and no competitor to your content. Don't listen to the Fin Review. No competitor. You write once a week in the Fin Review.
Once a month.
Once a month.
Yeah.
Once a month. Yeah, and that's a broader deal that I have with the AFR. So
which is a great deal. It's great to see them also continue. Obviously, you're a competitor somewhat of them, and in fact, they've sort of kept you in the stable, which is great for them, but also great for you because you get some legal help and all that kind of stuff. So feels like a great win-win.
The overlap of your subscriber base to the Fin subscriber base would be close to 100%, is my guess.
It
would have to be.
We wouldn't be comparing. I wouldn't be letting them look up my
Washing
shit,
it.
and they wouldn't let me look up theirs.
Yeah, it would have to. Like, I think there would be I don't think.
I suspect that's right.
That's why I keep saying to you, I don't think it's. If you subscribe to the Fin, you should subscribe to Rampart, 100%. Basically.
Well, I think everybody should subscribe to Rampart. It's a great read. Yeah. So it's thank you for coming on, Joe. It's great. We look forward to you.
Nice to see you again.
Hopefully come for a third crack and take over Sten Schultz reign.
I'm up for it if you are.
Thanks, mate. That's great.